Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Prey versus Predator. We have a fascinating conversation today. PJ, tell us. This is so great.
The thing that we're going to look at today is creating safe spaces in our religious institution. And how do we even start the conversation? Where do we go?
And like in our last episode, we are so over the moon, so happy to have the very wise Sophia joining us. She brings such unique insight to our episodes. We just love it that she can come.
Welcome.
Yay, Thank you. Glad to be here.
So one of the areas I specialize in is attachment. We're going to borrow not just from the attachment theory, but we're going to borrow from empirical studies and things that we know work. So from the research that we have on attachment, we know that there's 3 pillars to a successful, healthy attachment. Why is that important? From the research, we know people who have secure attachment have more problem-solving abilities. They have lasting friendships. They have healthy, intimate relationships. They have more happiness. They also have less depression, anxiety. They have less mental health issues. So this is a sort of a foundational source to kind of draw from, because ideally we want to create institutions that are healthy. So the 3 pillars of attachment that we're going to start with, there is protection, security, and comfort. I'll explain a little bit about each of those. The idea of protection is just that, keeping people safe, making sure that there's no danger. If there is danger, we remove it. The rhythms of life, the protocols, the
routines.
Yeah, routines. We know what to expect and how to expect and when to expect. So that could be, we know what Thanksgiving dinner looks like. We know when Christmas is, that type of thing. And comfort is, again, what it sounds like. It's when you are hurting and in pain, I wrap around you. I connect with you. I do things that for you are comforting. So of course, there is an entire body of literature around this. We are not doing it justice by labeling 3 pillars, but we're going to start, because one of the things I thought was fascinating from attachment theory is that as much as there are 3 pillars, one of those pillars has to be present for the other 2 to be effective. And that one is protection. If we don't have protection and offer protection in our relationships, it does not matter how secure or how comforting you are. So let's take the example of maybe a parent who leaves a loaded handgun on the counter. It doesn't matter how secure you are in making sure your child goes to bed at a certain time. It doesn't matter how comforting you are when they shoot you or somebody else or themselves. If that child isn't protected, if that person isn't protected, no matter what happens after that, everything depends on the protection. Are you with me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I want to look at this from that perspective of let's just start, because I think, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, I think we do, as religious institutions, as I see, we get security pretty spot on. There's a lot of
routines and programs and
history.
What you do in the church day, right?
Like we know what to expect.
Yeah,
absolutely.
When you grow up in that institution, you know what it looks like, especially in I think if you're in a mass sort of service, you know the order of that. If you are in a, evangelical service, okay, there's music here and there's this here and there's tithe and offering here, the routine.
And there's a fair amount of comfort.
Yeah.
I think there's a birth, there's a funeral, there's cookies, there's meals, there's a fair amount
Don't
of
forget potlucks. Come on.
Yes.
Fellowship.
So there are some areas that we do really well, and I think that we can look at those, but I want to look at one. I see this idea of protection. And I think that this is where I'm going to give most religious institutions an F. And if you're from an institution, a religious institution, or you attend one or you lead one, I want you to hear us today, listen carefully, see how yours holds up. So can we talk a little bit about this? What comes to your mind around protection and your experience in the institution you were involved with?
And I want to ask, who are we protecting and who are we not protecting?
Great question.
Who do we protect? Any stories about that, or who do we not protect? I love what you said in the last episode, Jill, about I have a right to feel safe and protected at church.
Yeah.
And you're right. Who is it that we are protecting? What are we doing when we entrust our children to someone who's overseeing? Have they had a criminal record check? Do we know them? Are they trained to work with children? Or is it we're short of people and it's the next warm body?
We need a warm body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the vulnerability within children's ministry, youth ministry, it ends up being the most charismatic 20-year-old in the church that ends up leading it. And we don't know for sure whether that person has been vetted in their safety, in their knowledge, etc. And where are all those protections that are put in place? Because we know that's another area of the church that's highly vulnerable.
I think
So
that's a
there's
great
all of these
point.
things.
Because I think of like if you work with children, you have to be, if you're in a public sector, you have to have a record search. You have to have training, CPI training, all these things about critical interventions. And you have some sort of foundation that people can go, okay, I trust you with my child. But if you're in these communities or these churches, it's like, well, you're a warm body or you really like kids. Well, why do you like kids? We don't know.
So let's throw it out there because we're coming from the perspective right now of as prey. Did you feel protected in your institution? And if not, why? And tell us a little bit about it.
I have a story. When I was in my early teens, I was sexually abused by an individual. He was 3 years older. He's 3 years older than I am. And we were caught. And I was dragged through the mud and told that I was a dirty girl. And I was shamed. And I was told I was a disgrace. And he got off scot-free, even though he was the one that abused me. But because I was involved in something sexual, I was dirty.
So what level of protection was that for you?
0. I was vilified, and he got off scot-free, and he was, and the my predator was seen as this good, godly boy, and he was a piece of shit.
So not only was there not protection, but is it fair to say there was a siding with the predator to abuse, to further abuse you?
Saying that I must have asked for it.
Right. So not only was there not protection, but there was an alignment with the abuser.
Oh, definitely.
And a re-victimizing.
Definitely. And I was just seen as ashamed, especially because my dad
And
was
victim
pastor.
blaming.
Oh, yeah.
So like not just 0, but a re-traumatizing, a re-victimizing.
Yeah.
So there's not only no safety, but actually that institution for you became a dangerous place.
Absolutely.
And what's interesting is the protection was put toward the dangerous person.
That's right.
Is that a one-off or is this normal?
No, I think it's totally normal. And I remember my dad saying to me, even though my dad was so mad at me, he did say, the boy always gets off scot-free. Like my dad was cognizant of the wrong that was being done to me, even though he did not protect me.
Even though there was no protection.
There was no protection.
And in fact, re-victimization.
Yeah.
Is that the only time that happened?
Well, that's the story I'm going to tell right now.
No, what I mean is that the only time that you were not protected, but all the other times you were protected?
No.
Right.
It's a pattern. It's the way it goes.
Okay. How step in here. Like I'd love to.
Amber, Sophia, go.
Well, a story that comes to mind for me is I have an uncle who was very high up in a denomination. And I had an interaction with him where he grabbed my chest and made a lewd comment. And when I brought that to the denomination, they took my statement. It was later revealed in that process that he had multiple offenses and there was like a whole bunch of record. And then I held them to account, said, what are you going to do? And he ended up being disciplined by not being allowed to be an itinerant minister for 1 year. And after that, there was no contact for me. There was no victim support, and there was multitude of victims. No victim support offered whatsoever. It was not handled in any way, according to the laws of the land, if you will, no accountability that this is sexual assault. And maybe we should consider getting the police involved, because I think that's another huge problem in the church is we're not holding people accountable to the law. We're handling it inside. And then we're choosing our own justice system, and like the church is outside of the law. For example, your story is so tragic, and I'm so deeply sorry that happened to you. And I feel that pain. And that was a criminal act.
That's right.
Yeah.
And no one even considered that that was a criminal act. And all of these things are happening. And then even if they took it to the place where we could say, oh, they protected me by holding him in account, it would still be in some weird office with a few pastors talking to him. And what do we call holding account? Because I don't think it would be bringing the police in for a statement.
Well, it should be.
And so even when there's, quote, some forms of accountability, it's still this one-off from what would create true accountability, which is what you did is illegal, and now you need to face the consequences of that. Am I reporting you, or are you reporting yourself?
Which I find, like, let's park on that for 2 seconds. I find that so fascinating that the internal workings of this moral high ground, as we might imagine it to be, is less interested in protecting victims than the, there's lots of words for it, the English, the pagans, the worldly, essentially the people outside that institution. They care so much more deeply, and you are so much more protected. That doesn't mean you are protected there either necessarily, but that you would be more protected there. That protection, this number one place, the number one most important part of being safe in relationships, is not only not valuable in that institution, but that you are in danger in that institution. Amber?
Well, I don't really have such, a story of needing absolute protection. I think for me, I was thinking about how when I became a teenage girl and you start developing and you start, growing, and men in the church would grow and I could feel the uncomfortableness that they felt towards me, but it was my responsibility to not be attractive to them, or it was my responsibility to make them not fall.
Don't make a brother stumble.
Yeah, and that was, and I think
I'm responsible for your lust.
Yes, yeah. I am responsible for your lust, and I think that is under the umbrella. Like, I didn't feel like I was protected to just be who I was and not think about that. I had to think about whether or not. I remember going to an athletic thing, a youth group, and one of the teacher, grown-ups there had a boner in his shorts. And I don't know if I can say that, but, and I just remember looking down and kind of going, oh, I don't know what that, it's confusing when you're a 13-year-old girl, and no one was really stepping in, and you just think it's this institution where it's almost, it is put on the young women to protect the men, the gaze of the men, to protect. And I'm sure we all have stories about that involve purity culture, all of that stuff. But it's always on the position of the females. And I'm sure, I didn't grow up in a very, it was conservative, but it was, it was contemporary. But I'm sure it's even worse in some cultures, especially in some more traditional cultures, right? It's unfortunate.
And I would say damaging and devastating and criminal. And I find this a fascinating conversation, because not one of us can say we felt protected by our institution. And if we're not vulnerable as young women in need of protection, and I would say as middle-aged women and older women, I don't know that they fare much better. I don't know many people, to be really frank, I don't know many people who've been in traumatic situations that will step forward and say, I felt so protected by my religious institution. I think of in the Canadian religious institutions that dealt with the Indigenous people. There's a great example of just the horrors and the traumas and the complete and utter lack of protection of an entire peoples. And there's still no accounting. A couple of I'm sorry's maybe that have had to be like eked out and demanded. So this is the breadth and depth of this is huge. I think we're just a tiny sampling. How about in your relationship with your predator? Because what's unique about the relationship with a predator is because the religious institutions often, we talked about this in the last podcast, they really like a redemption story. They really like to wrap around a victim in certain ways. And yet we all feel victimized without. So, talk to me a little bit about when it comes to that predator relationship. What did you experience in terms of protection? What did you want to experience? What did you expect to experience? And tell your story a little bit.
So, I was a grown woman. I was just surprised that no one asked me how I was doing.
Mm.
And it wasn't as though I was hurt by their lack of interest, but I was surprised by their lack of interest. That they wanted to know that I was in a good mood and that I could go to work every day. But there was no, are you okay? And even my mom, I've talked a little bit about my mom. She never once asked me if I was okay.
And this is the end of your relationship, or when it was dissolving?
When things had sort of blown up.
And when it was really clear that you had been in a predatory relationship.
Right.
What do you think her why was? Why she didn't ask you?
My mom?
Mm-hmm.
You just didn't talk about those things.
But isn't that the big idea in church? That's another thread. We don't talk about these things, right? It's very difficult. God hates divorce.
Right.
And we say that like it's the ultimate carte blanche statement of like the top thing that he hates. I kind of think he hates molestation, adultery. I think he hates like lying and gaslighting and doing all of these other insidious behaviors. And I kind of think he has feelings about those things too. Emotional abuse, physical abuse. I think there's a lot of things that he would probably put on the I hate that too list, but this one seems to be such a overarching one that will ignore all the other parts because we don't want to talk about divorce.
So was there any like can you point to any place that you felt protected in any way, shape, or form anywhere? Like
I would have people pray for me.
What did that feel? Did you experience that as protection?
I don't know that I even thought about it at the time.
I'm thinking back now.
No.
Okay. Yeah.
I think I had some kindness extended towards me. People brought food and comfort, right? I had comfort brought forward to me. Fortunately, I had two really close friends who circled around me through the thick of it, for the long thick of it. I think what happens too when you're when your life implodes and everything, like you've lost your marriage, your kids are reeling, you've lost we planted this church, like the amount of loss and the amount of grief, it's a tsunami in your life. And so people, I think in those settings it's not maybe that they don't care, but they actually don't know what to do. And the pain and suffering of those kinds of events go on so much longer than people's capacity to stay focused on it because they have their own stuff and their own issues. So I think I don't want to throw everyone under the bus and say there was no care, but protection. If I think about that piece, who would be responsible to protect me in that environment once the church is imploded? I would have said, okay, it's the governing body that offered the ordination and the license and all the legalities. And I think I mentioned this briefly in the other podcast, but it's like there was no contact and there was no accountability within that structure. And so he was able to keep his license and then continue to do a different business using it. And so it's just like all of those things were not in place. There was no offering, once again, for support, for can we offer real help? Like, hey, pay for therapy for me and my kids, or something that would actually be tangible. Like thank you for the casserole, but that's not going to heal the devastation of my family. What do we really need? Right? So,
yeah. And I would say this just popped into my mind that when everything came out about my predator and what was going on in my life, I had a board member say, I really feel like you deceived me because we didn't know about this before.
So well, you deceived me.
Yeah.
That language is so.
Yeah. I remember our board saying, if you're going to keep your laptop, you need to pay cash and cash it out. And I'm like, really? I'm like, I've just lost income. We've lost our jobs. Like, and now I've got to pay you for my secondhand laptop. And this is week 2. And that's what's the priority on the list of how you're going to extend care towards me. The board did absolutely nothing to bring me comfort. They gave me a record of employment. They gave me a bill. And they asked when they could pick up the church gear. And I had to pack it by myself, weeping, watching a whole life that we had built, put in boxes, alone.
Right now, in this moment, that lack of protection.
What about for you, PJ? You're leading this, but what about for you? Did you feel protected?
No. Not only was there not, but there was this throwing under the bus. So, and this is I find this really interesting because the victims in these situations are almost universally prey, and prey are the ones who show up for work, like Sophia. They're the ones who keep bringing their children to church. They're the ones who
load the van alone.
Yeah. They're also the ones who are not necessarily shouting from the rooftops to malign and destroy the reputation of their predator. Even though maybe that would be ideal, but because of the nature of who they are, they don't want to hurt or harm anyone else any more than needs to happen.
And that's what the predator does. Undermines your voice. And we know from research that the first voice becomes the filter with which the second voice travels through. And so if you're not aware of that bias, you're starting your story with a bias. And so you end up losing your voice. I had someone come to me 3 years after the fact and said, I'm so sorry that I re-victimized you.
Wow.
Which was really powerful.
Yes.
Difficult still processing how to relate fully to it. But it was like, I believed the narrative that he spoke about you.
Yeah. And
she told me the things that he said I said, and there were all the things that he had said on our pillow.
Yes.
All the things. And I remember saying to her, why would you believe, after seeing everything that he did, why did you believe his story over your own experience with me? That was the most confusing. Like, you've sat in my home, you've been to my birthdays, like, you know me. And yet the predator is so capable of undermining your voice, twisting the narrative, manipulating, controlling, and all of those things. It's like, she's like, I don't know how that happened, but it was so convincing. This is what she said. And so I can only imagine, because that whole group, after everything imploded, they all stayed together. Our core group stayed together and inserted him because he was suffering, and they were worried that he would be suicidal or he's in so much pain because he's having all of this loss. So they felt the need to tuck him in. And then when he came public with the affair partner, she just slid into that spot and everyone accepted her. And there's
part of our leadership team posting on there, like, live your best life. So happy for you.
Oh, like I just want to stab myself in the heart when I hear that.
It was, my kids were so irate and devastated at how they felt so unprotected. It was so much more abuse when it was my whole core group
Yeah.
of friends that were rallying around him at my expense and including him in places where we had always been. It was absolutely traumatizing.
I was going to ask you if you guys would agree with this. I feel like the abuse done at the hands of the religious institution hurt more.
Yeah, it was.
It felt more
the
deep.
injustice of it. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like he has done all of these things, and now you're all sitting around having charcuterie. Like I could hardly, the betrayal that felt, and the invalidation of my suffering.
Yeah.
It just heaped more pain on something that was already unmanageable.
Yeah, I'm lying broken, bleeding,
Yeah.
destroyed
Yeah.
by someone who has ripped me limb from limb, and you just stepped over my body, spit on it, on your root to wrap him in a blanket of love.
Yes.
That's how that feels. And I get, we've talked about the predator, a wolf being a wolf seems like I get it. But when your shepherd does it to you, when the shepherd lets the wolf in, lets the wolf rip you limb from limb, leaves you for dead, and then they extol the wolf and make sure he has a comfy bed to sleep in that night and feeds him really well and feels sorry for him, the unspeakable pain is, I don't even know what to do with it sometimes.
So why does this happen? What do you think is in the institution itself?
I think people don't know what to do, or they've been taught to love. Yeah.
I agree with both of those statements.
But there is without protection.
Yeah, but people don't know.
Right.
People are ignorant, and people have been taught to love.
But there's not. So what's interesting is I didn't feel loved.
Yeah, I didn't feel loved.
So where was the love? This is like I think we're getting to the heart of this issue. Where was the love for the actual victim? Was there just an ignorance of who the real victim was?
I think it's ignorance because I do think predators whine the loudest, moan the loudest.
Yes.
When they're injured, they're the one, they are the ones to double over and scream in like injury. Whereas often the prey are the ones who suck it in and
or are
don't
angry.
do that, or are angry, which is
Messy.
uncomfortable.
In fact, messy,
Yeah,
right?
the anger is very uncomfortable, especially in religious institutions. Like, you shouldn't be angry, And I've said this in season 1. Anger to me is a fuel. It's helped me find my way. But it is an icky thing. In the church, it's icky, undesirable. It's don't be angry, but we've had this discussion,
and of course that's interesting because of course the predator isn't angry. The predator looks soft and forlorn and repentant and broken
because they just experienced the consequences of their choices,
Right.
And their self-pity is pouring out of every pore, but it looks like grief.
And that is easier to deal with than the true victim who is bleeding, messy, angry, hurt, needy, traumatized, and probably quiet.
Probably quiet.
And if our core belief is redemption, she didn't sin, so she doesn't need the church as much as the perpetrator does, because he needs the power of God to heal that broken spot that caused him to do these horrible things. So that storyline again is fueling our need to go after the one who looks
quote, the most broken, because if you do that, you have to be even more broken than the bleeding out wife, or let's not gender, like the other partner, because I don't want to ever suggest that it's men
Always
who are harming
women,
women and not women harming men, because we know these things flow both ways.
Absolutely.
So are you saying, when you say that there is a context where the institution, the religious, is so fixated on the narrative that they can sell to more people, to more congregants, to build their church or build their religious institution, that they need that narrative of redemption from the person who's
they're looking for the story to be able to tell.
Is
It's
the
a
most
good
important
story.
thing.
And then, hey, he found freedom in my men's group.
Well, and and I think that's interesting, because I think a lot of people, we're talking about, how prey are sort of connected into, there's a lot of prey in religious institutions just by nature of what they are. So it's interesting because they do tend to be relationship oriented, grace focused, forgiving. And so they feel they tend to avoid conflict, accountability. These things mean you have to have boundaries, be proactive, take a hard line, call the police. None of that feels grace-filled, forgiving, loving. It doesn't seem sweet. There is no pretty bow.
And it's also not glamorous either.
It's like, we're going to take that pretty bow off. We're going to look at what's in that package, and we are going to make sure that before we throw you to the wolf again, that package has to be cleaned up.
In fact, it looks bad on the institution. If I'm looking at an institution that is having public issues, predatory issues, would I want to go there? It's much easier to spin a tale of redemption, a tale of grace, a tale of love, than a tale of accountability.
Which, if we're focusing on the surface, if we're focusing on security and comfort, we can look really, really good. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is becoming an institution that prioritizes the predator, that allows the predator to thrive. We encourage the predatory behavior. There is no atonement required. And we take prey who's been ripped limb from limb. We throw them to the wolves, literally and figuratively. We cast them out. I'm going to guarantee those are the ones we want in our church to protect. And then we create systems where predators are extolled, are safe, and we wonder why there's a demise in our leadership and in our institutions of corruption, because we are safe havens for predators.
Okay, I am curious. Would a man be more protected in this religious institution if they are the prey and the woman was the predator? Do you have any thoughts on that, Sophia?
That's a doozer, isn't it?
Yeah.
I would say I think men would get more support than women have historically.
I think ultimately the church wants to protect itself. The church wants to look good.
Wow.
And I think it's a lot of work.
Oh, yeah. It's a lot of work.
Too much work.
Like to protect the actual victim.
Yeah.
Oh.
Because don't you think that predators are masters at seducing the image management that the institution is looking for? Like they are very seductive in their use of being a victim that is help, like I need help and
they
I'm
moan
broken.
the loudest. They moan the best. You know,
they just reel them in.
And if we can take
in.
this story and turn it around, it becomes this shining example of how effective we are as a church.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Therefore, we have protected ourselves.
As opposed to the messiness
Yippee-doo.
of actually siding with the real victim who is laying bleeding.
Yeah, I feel like we've opened such a big can of worms.
Yeah, this has been a lot.
Yeah. And thank you for engaging with us. We really appreciate it. I think we're going to go on to a third episode where we're going to talk about what the church can do. Worldly sorrow versus godly grief. What does that look like? What is the church capable of doing, or the religious institution? What is out there for them to protect the prey?
If they're serious about actually protecting the people who need protection, what does it need to look like?
What does it look like?
Join us.
We really want, if you have stories that involve this sort of abuse or institutional abuse or anything, we just want to hear them. Please send us a message. Tell us your story so we can discuss it or share with it or even help you with it.
Or even if somebody did it well, like even if you were a prey and you were protected, we would celebrate that as well.
And it doesn't have to also be, a Christian religious institution. It could just be an institution of any sort. We're really curious about what this looks like and how we can do it better, because that is our intention here. How can we do this better? How can we protect the prey of the world?
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks again for tuning in. Make sure to check out our previous episode where we explore why predators thrive in religious institutions and, in particular, why they so frequently rise to positions of authority in those communities.